So, Johnny, I don't know if you have heard the footsteps through here.
I mean, I'm hearing your footsteps through here.
Yes, but sometimes you might be the only person in the alley. And it's not just light footsteps like mine, but heavy boots.
Sometimes I wear boots, yes. Oh, you mean other than me?
Other than you, and not just the boots, but rattling chains. And then suddenly you see the person. He's right here, ready to pass you by, and you stand back because you know this is a member of the chain gang. The jail is just around the corner. And every morning the jailer lined up the prisoners and chained them together one behind the other. Well, back in August 1865, one of those prisoners was murdered by one of the guards walking right through here, hit by his baton. When they got back to the jail yard, the man was lying at the back of the chain gang, obviously dead. They unshackled him and buried him right there. And since then, people walking through this alley have discovered he's still here. Footsteps, the rattling chains, and then sometimes they do see the single individual in his gray canvas jacket and pants, the sort of uniform a prisoner wore back in the 1860s. Yeah, come back sometime because he's here often.
Okay. I can see why people would find this to be a haunted place, even if it were not, and I'm not saying that it's not, but if it were to be a completely unhaunted place, it looks very haunted. I can imagine walking through and be like, brr, goosebumps.
People really don't like coming through here, and they often are somewhat trepidatious. They'll turn around and go back the other way, but the guides make them come through this way. It's one of the favorite places we have to tell stories.
Yeah, now, so a lot of people have these experiences in here.
Oh, yeah.
How about yourself, John?
I have experienced things through here, but, I'm here so often, many times a night sometimes.
Right.
And the ghosts are used to us.
Right.
They really are.
They don't feel the need to expose themselves.
No, in fact, we're told by psychics who have much more ability to see and communicate with ghosts than I have. They like it. They're flattered that we're talking about them.
I see. You are the head of a family business, as I understand it. And what we're doing right here is actually very much related to that family business.
Very much. I started this 25 years ago. I'd been collecting ghost stories for years. I never imagined it would grow into a business with my son involved, my daughter has been involved, my wife has been involved, and now lots of other guides as well.
Well, the good thing about family is that you know that they're always there. They're not going to ghost you before.
I hope not.
Excellent. Well, these are the Pedicabs. Obviously, I'm also a tour guide. And I had some guests who came from Nevada, and they were paranormal investigators. And they brought like all this recording equipment, and they went to a bunch of different houses and checked to see if they were haunted. They also checked my Pedicab, because I'd had quite a few flats and broken chains in a very narrow period of time, and I thought maybe my Pedicab was haunted. The results were inconclusive, but do keep an eye open.
Well, perhaps did they check you? Maybe you're haunted.
Maybe I'm haunted.
Yeah, people can be haunted as much as pedicabs and houses, yeah.
So this might seem a little bit like an obvious question, and I kind of hinted at this question already, but I wanted to make sure that I really asked it. And that is, these tours that you do about ghosts and all of this stuff, of course, could be just the entertainment aspect. People are entertained by bone-chilling stories. But John, are you a believer?
There's no doubt I am a believer. But in some ways, it's like asking the priest if he believes in God, because some don't. But in North America, about 50% of people do believe in ghosts, and the other half don't, or they don't want to admit they believe in ghosts. When I was a kid, I was in that 50% that didn't believe in ghosts, but gradually I began to change my mind. So now I'm on the other side. But indeed, yeah, I do. But some of the stories we hear are probably fictitious. They're urban legends, which are interesting, and we do tell those occasionally, but we're mostly interested in the stories that are well documented, that have been around for a long time, that people have really experienced. And it's not just something that is out of the corner of their eye. It's a full-fledged figure. It's a feeling.
Right.
We can see ghosts, we can smell ghosts, we can hear ghosts, and we can feel them. And people have had many experiences like this, real experiences. And so I can say that I have had some of those experiences.
Generally, when it's something where a person goes from believing one thing to another, I ask if there's a eureka moment. That seems like a weird turn of phrase in this case. But was there a eureka moment, or a moment where you experienced something where you were like, okay, well, clearly,
Well, it kind of snuck up on me gradually. And as a student, as an adolescent, I was firmly in the camp, no, I don't believe in these things. But as more and more things happened, that eureka moment might have come when I worked at the Empress Hotel in the mid-1960s. A couple of summers and weekends in the winter. And, that place is so spooky. And I left that place after a couple of years, and I was a firm believer at that point. But probably my real eureka moment came when I was just a little tiny kid. And I knew there was something happening. My parents tried to tell me, no, don't worry, there's no such thing as ghosts. But I remembered that. And afterwards, years and years later, when I was an adult, I realized that was a ghost. There was no doubt about it. My parents were probably just trying to convince me that everything's okay. I'm not sure whether they believed in ghosts or not. I think they did. But they were trying to encourage me to just be calm and just pretend it was something else. But I knew deep down that it was definitely a ghost.
I used to spook my parents at the place where we used to live because there was a chair that was often empty, and I would say, "Oh, Mom, who's that lady sitting in the chair? Who's the lady in the chair? Who's the lady in the chair?" Man, I think they got pretty tired of the lady in the chair.
Was there a lady in the chair?
I mean, I think so. I don't remember the lady now, but allegedly that's what I was saying, and I was not bothered at all. I was just like, "Oh, there's a lady in the chair."
Well, I was probably about 2, possibly 2.5. We were really, really small, living in Ontario, and I was temporarily sharing a room with my brother, who was older. And we did not, this was 1951. We had no TV. I didn't even know what a TV was. And one morning I woke up, and on the wall, just a couple of inches away from where I was, there was a face of a man in the wall talking to me. And I can't remember his voice, but I can see him right now. I can see his lips moving. And I said to my brother, what's going on here? And he said, "Oh, don't tell Mom and Dad. They don't like to hear about him." Well, of course, I was a kid. I blabbed right away. They said, "Don't be so silly. There's no such thing as ghosts." And, well, I kind of believed them. I don't know what I thought it was, but I went on for years remembering this. 70 years later, my brother and I were talking, and we haven't talked about this at all. And I said, "Hey, do you remember that time?" And, well, he remembered the time that I had to share his room because he didn't like it at all. But he did not remember that I had actually seen that ghost. He said, yeah, he saw it all the time.
Jeez.
Yeah, so 2 people, same family, same room. We saw a ghost, and we hadn't discussed it in 70 years, but it was definitely there. I haven't gone back to that house. I know it's still standing. I've seen it.
Okay.
But I wonder if those ghosts are still there. Well, that one ghost, there probably were no more. And the funny thing is, it was a new house. But that stands out in my mind all these years as the most vivid memory. That was my first ghostly encounter, although I definitely would not admit it at the time.
It's funny because you can actually have quite a few experiences, but then you still tend to err on the side of not believing in it because it seems like such a strange thing to believe.
We're in such a rational world. I think people are looking for, well, maybe it was just the light, maybe I was seeing things, maybe I was hungry, all those sorts of things. Maybe it was just my imagination. But sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's very real.
Yeah. Now, we won't be able to visit the haunted house in question that we were just talking about, but we can visit somewhere else that is allegedly haunted, an office space that you actually lease right here in the square.
In fact, we're right here. It's the Burns house.
Oh, here we are. Just 2 twirly mustache Johns going into a haunted building.
Now, the lobby doesn't look too spooky.
I mean,
but if we go through
standard
here,
office building
let
spooky.
me lead you in.
Okay. And a little bit spookier, yes?
Yes, indeed.
I love the cat.
A lot of people notice the cat.
It's the
It was
first
painted
thing.
by the mother of one of my guides, and it was her own cat. Anyway, it looks rather malevolent, doesn't it? But my guide can't bear to have it in her house. But a lot of people say, oh, isn't that marvelous? Everybody asks about the cat. It just adds a certain tone of spookiness to the room.
It does, it does. So you were saying that this room is haunted, I presume not by the cat.
It was haunted long before the cat
Long
painting was
before the
here.
cat.
You know, a lot of people who are sensitive to ghosts come into this room and they can't actually stay. Many people who come into our tours will stay here and they feel uncomfortable. They feel as though they're being choked. There's something I feel in that room over there, which is where I often put my bicycle. It feels as though the floor is moving, as though we're on the deck of a ship. It's not moving. It's absolutely stable. Others feel that as well. And through there, just behind our friend, there's a room that we use for storage, and one of my guides, who is extremely sensitive to ghosts, will not go in there. She's had some very bad experiences. Others don't.
Mhm.
And over there, there's a wooden wall, and people who sit against that wall often feel the chairs moving under them. Now, I'll just demonstrate with this one. The chairs are moving like that.
Right.
And people have leapt up. Others have said that something has reached through the wall and has been trying to grab them from behind. At one point, somebody who had seen this before thought that we have some sort of little thing that we pressed with our foot to start the chair moving. No, there's nothing there. It's just a regular chair. These sorts of things take place all the time. We've had a number of paranormal research groups come into this room because there's so much going on. They use it to practice. If they've got new members, they want to show them what can be done, either with their own sensitivity or with equipment,
Right.
divining rods, pendulums, electronic things. Yeah, this room is a good one for that because usually there are results.
Well, hopefully the mics are still recording then.
Well, it's happened. Often they don't.
Right. You talk in very sort of vague terms. Your one of your employees doesn't enter that room because bad things happen. What happens in there, pray tell?
She just feels very, very negative,
Okay.
and she feels queasy. She knows there's something there. She doesn't know what it is. She just doesn't want to be there. And a lot does go on in this room. This was a hotel, the Burns House,
Mhm.
built in the 1880s. It went through many different uses and was empty, completely empty for a number of decades at one point before it was fixed up. But we don't really know what this back room was used for. We have reason to believe that there were some rather negative things that might have gone on in some parts of this building, or certainly nearby as well, such as the hangings. Right next door was the jail for the colony of Vancouver Island. It stood there for decades, from 1859 until the 1880s. And yes, there were public hangings at that time. They took place at sunrise. Everybody came to watch. And many people waited until the back door of the jail opened. They saw the hangman coming out. He didn't want anyone to know who he was, so he wore a black hood. And he led the procession, the prisoner, of course, in his chains, the jailer, the sheriff, Dr. Helmken, and the priest, and up the stairs of the gallows until they reached the platform. And then right in the middle was the trap door. The prisoner was positioned there. They tied his feet. They bound his hands behind his back. They removed the chains. And then the sheriff stepped at the front of the platform and read the death warrant. The priest stepped forward, and men took off their hats. The hangman pulled a hood of oiled silk over the prisoner's face so the public would not see his face when he died. And as the priest began to recite his prayers, the hangman put his hand on the lever that controlled the trap door. When the priest said, "Forgive us our trespasses," they would be the final words the prisoner would hear. The drop fell, the prisoner's neck snapped, and it was a humane way, they believed, to kill people.
Fast.
Very fast, within a minute or two. If it didn't quite work,
Less humane.
the prescribed way was to go down below, and the hangman had to grab the feet of the prisoner and pull. And that would break the neck. But they didn't have to do that here because they really did know how to do it properly. But once the victim was dead, and Dr. Helmken, a doctor from the early days, was here to pronounce the victim dead, they cut the rope. The sheriff stepped forward and called out to everybody in Bastion Square, "Who claims this body? Who claims this body?" Perhaps there was a friend or a family member who might come and take
Or
the body
somebody who
away.
just liked bodies.
Perhaps. The idea was that they were supposed to take it to the cemetery, but we won't get into what else they might have done with them. But There were often many bodies not claimed by the end of the day, and so they were buried with very little ritual right behind the jail in the exact spot where they were hanged. And those bodies were never removed.
They're still
Eventually,
there.
they went to a different jail. The bodies remained there until the old jail was torn down in the 1880s. And what did they build on the site? The Supreme Court for British Columbia.
As one does.
Of course. And what's underneath the floor? Those bodies are still there, embedded forever under the floor of that building. And there are lots of ghosts in that building. It's currently empty. It's been empty for 10 years. But there are many ghosts in that building.
Fairly bored ghosts if it's been empty all that time.
But, they're going to fix the building up at some point.
Yeah.
I don't think I would want to be part of the crew that's fixing it up because ghosts don't like change. They've had that building all to themselves all those years, including some very prominent ones like the ghost of Sir Matthew Bailey Begbie, the hanging judge, the Supreme Court Justice. He and the others are there just waiting for somebody to come along. Yes, when that building is renovated, the ghosts are going to act up in a major way. They hate change, and that's why they're going to make everything so disruptive.
I see. Hashtag chains, not change.
Yeah, that's right.
I just came up with that. Thank you. I'll be here all night and after as well. Okay. Of course, there's the investigative element in the sense that we all would like to know better what happens after we die. Is there an afterlife? What kind of afterlife are we looking at? But I also just wanted to ask if there is an element for you of this providing a particular type of lens to showcase a fascination with history.
It is. I am a historian first.
Yeah.
And I came to the ghost storytelling later. I was doing a lot of history tours for years. I do believe that I'm still telling history stories when I'm doing ghost stories. And we have a lot of school tours. Teachers say, we want the kids to find out some history, but don't tell them you're telling them history. Tell them ghost stories, but include some history in it. And so we do. And yeah, there was a judge, Sir Matthew Bailey Begbie. He was the hanging judge. That was his courthouse, and so on. And they learn that, but they're fascinated because they hear the story about his ghost coming back.
Right.
And we can do that with a lot of things. So we weave a lot of history into our stories, but we can't overdo it because people who come on our tours want ghost stories.
Getting the kids to eat the vegetables by also giving them some ice cream.
That's right.
Yeah. So now let's have some more ice cream. We're in Commercial Alley.
It's a very old alley dating back to the gold rush days of 1858. The American Hotel once stood here, and Tommy Burns operated it for his family.
From the Burns building.
That's right, the same family. They later built the Burns house, but they started off here at the American Hotel. And one night, it was 1889, very warm night, Tommy was smoking a cigar just down here at the corner before he turned in for the night. And one of his employees, a young Chinese boy by the name of Chan, was running frantically out of Waddington Alley, which is nearby.
Right.
And he ran right past Tommy, right down here, down Commercial Alley, and into American Alley, which is around the back of the old American Hotel. Tommy thought it was a bit odd, but the next day when Chan didn't show up for work, he thought that was even stranger. Chan had never missed any work in 3 years. And when Chan was still missing the next day, that's when Tommy went to the police and said, one of my employees is missing. Has anyone mentioned this? Is this the person you're looking for? They pulled out a wanted poster. Reward, $150 for information leading to the arrest of a young man wanted for murder in Chinatown. Yes, that was Chan. Well, Tommy led the police back to the American Hotel. They didn't think he would be there, but they were going to talk to the other staff, most of them Chinese. Did they know where Chan had gone? Well, they didn't have a chance to do that because they found him.
They didn't have a chance to do that? I'm ruining your stories.
You're ruining
I'm so
the
sorry.
stories. But they found Chan hiding in the coal cellar around the back. He'd been there for 2 days and 2 nights, and when they pulled him out into the light of the alley, they could see that his clothes were covered with dried blood. He was taken to the jail, but he committed suicide in his jail cell, and his ghost has come back to this building. And the people who work here know that he's there. And, well, they don't have to do very much. They just leave out a sandwich or an apple or a cup of tea, something to appease Chan's ghost. You see, the idea of hungry ghosts is not a nice concept. The ghosts really do need to be fed, and that's a concept very well known in China of old. And so, yeah, Chan's ghost is here. But his ghost, of course, does appear in another place as well. Ghosts can appear in more than one place. And there's a very special reason why his ghost has come back at all. Let me save that until a little bit later.
Where are we going next?
Well, we're on our way to Waddington Alley, which is really just across the street. But if you're willing to pedal there, I'll enjoy the ride.
From one alley to another alley to another alley. From a feng shui standpoint, is there a particular reasons why ghosts would like alleys more than they would like, I don't know, main streets, larger streets?
Well, the ghosts, of course, are around everywhere.
Right.
But the alleys, being so narrow, do help concentrate the energy of the ghosts. That's what ghosts are. They're our energy left after we die. And narrow spaces will help confine that energy.
I see.
And even, stone walls and surrounding hills and mountains will help hold the energy in a certain place. But the narrow alleys and passageways of Old Town definitely hold the energy in a way that is very, very special.
That reminds me of another story I heard once, that the reason there are so many ghosts in houses is because they're closed in, because it is it's an enclosed space, and in fact they're trapped there even sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes they can't get out. Sometimes they don't want to leave, actually. And so if somebody has lived in a house, they might have felt comfortable there. It might have been their home for many, many years. They might have died there. But there are many reasons why ghosts will want to stay in a place that had some special significance for them, especially a place where they had lived for a long time.
But meanwhile, you mentioned, because you used to work at the Empress Hotel, that you became quite sure about ghosts when working at a hotel, not a house. So to know, is there something particularly spooky about hotels as well, in a different
Well, I
sort of
don't
way?
know if you knew this, but more people check in to hotels than check out.
Because they forget to?
No, because they die in hotels. Of natural causes, of course, but sometimes it's deliberate. But also, hotels are places where people have happy memories, perhaps a honeymoon, or they've had something horrible happen, and those ideas will stay with them for a long time.
So they'll return because
They will return, and it's said that when people die, their thoughts will take their ghosts to places in the distant past or far away, places that had some special significance for them. And so, yes, ghosts will often come back to visit a place like a hotel that had a very special reason for them to be there.
I mean, of course, one knows that people die everywhere. People die in supermarkets, people die at home, but of course, people will die at hotels. And you don't ever hear about, like, oh yeah, this hotel room that I'm staying in, somebody died there yesterday. But
it's unlikely that the desk clerks are going to say, oh, you lucky people, we're putting you in the room where the old lady died last night. No, they leave that part out. But people know, they know that, yeah, there's something here, and they may or may not freak out and want a new room.
now, as a pedicab operator, as a tour guide, I know that this alley has wooden bricks. That's basically all I know about Waddington Alley.
Well, the wooden blocks are pretty good because it's the only street left in the city that has them. But the wooden bricks as pavement actually help create the sound. Imagine a horse going over these, clip-clopping. It sounds like a resounding box. And even footsteps of people walking across these wooden blocks will echo much more than people who are walking on normal pavement. And this is a place rather like Helmkin Alley where people hear footsteps, but they also see a man, not dressed in the prisoner's uniform that we saw in Helmkin Alley, but they see a man nicely dressed, the sort of suit coat that a man might have worn back in the 1850s or 1860s, tall collar, cravat, top hat, frock coat. He's got a very tall forehead. He's got a very round face. Very distinctive man. And then suddenly he's not there, and the footsteps fade away. What they're seeing is the ghost of Alfred Waddington. He owned this land, and he put the alley through and named it after himself. It was a private thoroughfare for many years. And without knowing who he is, people see him all the time. And just down at the end of the alley, there's a plaque that has a picture of him. And people will see him, and then they notice the plaque. And they think,
That's that man.
that's the guy I saw last night. And they know now who it is. Yeah, he's here quite often.
Now, did he die in some particularly violent way, or
Well, he didn't even die in Victoria. He died in Ottawa of smallpox.
smallpox?
A rather painful way to go, but like many people, he has come back to a place that had some special significance. Ghosts often have unfinished business,
Right.
and that will draw them back to a place. He had lots of wonderful schemes. And yes, Alfred Waddington has come back to relive some of those ideas and hopefully maybe to eventually succeed in what he didn't succeed in his lifetime.
And what would that be?
Well, he wanted to build a railway across Canada.
So maybe he still will.
Yeah, well, somebody did it later, but it wasn't him.
Where to next? Another alley, I suppose?
It's an alley of sorts. It's actually a ravine.
A
where
ravine,
a
you
stream
say?
used to flow a long time ago. And it's kind of a spooky place,
Okay.
in behind some buildings that have fabulous stories.
We won't know until later on. I'm in the post-production phase, but I know that with still pictures, you often see in haunted places orbs.
Mhm.
Orbs are quite popular. Is there such a thing with video? Do you know?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I might see some orbs in the production later.
Well, orbs, yes, they're globes of light.
Yeah.
And some people call them ghost lights or spectral lights. Orbs can also just be flecks of dust and mist and that get picked up by the lens.
Yeah.
But orbs can also be telltale signs that ghosts are around. But people have taken pictures of ghosts for a long time, and it is known as spirit photography. And quite often people might be taking a picture and they're deliberately looking for ghosts. Maybe they see something with their own eye. They don't see something, perhaps, but the camera picks it up and they see it later. And today with digital photography and videography, we see the results almost instantly. Who's that person? He wasn't there when we took this picture. But not that long ago, people had film, and you would have a film in your camera possibly for weeks or months at a time, and you only took it in to be developed when you'd finished the roll. And by then you might have even forgotten the circumstances of when you took the picture. And a lot of people discovered people in those pictures that clearly were not there when they took those photographs. So it could happen. I'd like to find out if it does.
I have an interesting one. You mentioned Ottawa. There's this haunted jailhouse hostel in Ottawa. You seem familiar with it. They used to have this thing where if you stayed one night in death row, you could get a night for free. And I did that as a journalist at the time. And nothing particularly spooky happened while I was there, except that my partner at the time took a picture of me at the beginning of the night. This was back when we still did have film cameras. So it took a while before I could see this picture. And when I did, there were orbs around my face, like a beard, like you have, but just in orbs. And I thought that was the spookiest thing that happened in my whole stay there. Like, why specifically there?
Yeah. Perhaps the last person to have died in that cell was wearing a beard.
Maybe.
Yeah, I've been to that place, the old Carleton County Jail. It's really a spooky place. And although you were able to stay the night, there are lots of people who have not been able to. They leave that place terrified.
Yeah. Well, I can get that also because the whole building is just constantly creaking, and there's like, weird things happening with all of the lights and electricity. I mean, part of that is just that it's an old building and just like really complicated wiring. But
And of course, they did hang people in that building or right next to the building.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a creepy place. It really is.
When you think about ghosts, you think about somebody who got murdered violently. In fact, we might, if I'm not mistaken, I think we might be on our way to talk about one of Victoria's most
Indeed. It's
famous
one of the most
people
famous stories.
of that. But it's not only that. I mean, when we talk about Waddington, I mean, smallpox that isn't great, but death generally isn't most of the time, unless you're very, very fortunate. So that leads to the question, well, does how you died necessarily have anything to do with a person remaining as a spirit in a place or coming back to a place afterwards? Or can it be also just a natural byproduct of not being alive anymore?
Well, kind of all of the above, actually. But if people die a harrowing death, a horrible death, if they thought that they were murdered, ghosts will come back to raise havoc with the people that actually did kill them. But yeah, the way that somebody died will definitely influence whether they come back as a ghost, and sometimes as a friendly ghost or an unhappy ghost. Ghosts can be friendly. We don't mind those ones. It's the ones who are unfriendly that are really difficult to deal with.
Because what can you do?
There's nothing.
They're beyond your range of influence.
That's right. And the cause of their death, well, you can try to appease them somehow. Generally people who are nice people in their lifetime will come back as nice ghosts. I'm sure we all know people that we don't want to come back because they're nasty in life, they'll be nasty as ghosts. But if you add in a twist that they suffered a horrible death, then yeah, they're almost invariably going to come back as bad ghosts.
Speaking of which, we are here to talk about one such person.
Well, it's broad daylight, but let's think about nighttime.
Okay.
And buildings along here facing Johnson Street, once a pretty wild street with gambling dens, saloons, brothels, and dance halls, and pretty unsavory place, especially back here in the dark. And a man waiting, and he saw her earlier in the day. Ah, there she is again. She was leaving the Pilgrim Bakery just over here. She worked there, and he began to follow her at a distance so she wouldn't see him. Agnes Bings did not return home that night, and the police began searching for her the following morning. They heard from some people over here that she had crossed a bridge. Now, this was during the Klondike Gold Rush. This was late 1890s, and there were lots of violent crimes in Victoria, many murders, far more than today. But they were not prepared for what they saw. Agnes had been murdered Jack the Ripper style. She had been slit open, and her internal organs were carved out and were lying beside her in a pool of blood. Of course, in those days, the newspapers picked up every lurid detail. And although this kind of murder never had been seen in Victoria, many people remember that 10 years before, in the East End of London, England, isn't that what Jack the Ripper had done to his victims? Yes, it was. That's exactly how he had murdered his victims. And people were panicked. They stayed inside. They believed that Jack the Ripper might have been here. He was never caught. And that's one of the biggest aspects of this story. And when the police could not solve this, they brought in a psychic to help provide some clues. But the psychic couldn't solve this, simply made it worse by saying it was a serial killer. Yes, he's done it before many times. He will continue to do it until he's caught. But nobody was ever arrested for this. It remains one of Victoria's biggest unsolved murder mysteries. And so people wonder, was it Jack the Ripper? There were no more murders like that in Victoria. There were some close by. This was a serial killer on the loose.
He was on a holiday.
But was it Jack the Ripper, a copycat? We'll never know for sure. But the one thing we can be very certain about is that the ghost of Agnes Bings is still here. She is still with us. She's seen very close to the place where she had worked, the Pilgrim Bakery. It's on the other side of the bridge, along what is now a beautiful walkway called West Song Way.
I love that place.
It's a lovely place, but sometimes people know there's something not quite right. They see a shadowy figure moving quickly. She's fleeing for her life, and then suddenly, the ghost of Agnes is gone. When people see that ghost, it's also accompanied by a feeling of doom. Something horrible has happened, and that feeling stays with them for a very long time. Agnes Bings. Yes, indeed, she was murdered here in Victoria. By Jack the Ripper? Well, we'll never know that. But her ghost is one of those lingering spirits in Victoria that will never leave.
And she fits into a particular category of restless spirit, the trauma memory, one would
Yes.
say.
And ghosts come back to hopefully overcome some of the things that happened to them. And in this case, a violent murder. But perhaps if she runs hard enough, she will overcome that.
Obviously, the traumatized end up haunting, but I'm actually, if anything, I'm more interested, just from a personal level, even though they make less compelling stories, perhaps, in the kind of ghosts that your average person, or the majority of people are going to be like, okay, fighting cancer in a bed, or heart attack, or but still maybe potentially being a ghost. What can we learn from the kinds of sightings that we're getting about, like, our future, so to speak, as ghosts?
Well, we all will come back as ghosts. But the type of life you led, the circumstances of your death, the nature of the people that you left behind will all have some bearing on this, but also the physical surroundings. So there are places, like places near salt water,
Right.
that will hold the energy of ghosts more. The bedrock, and Victoria certainly has a lot of that, surrounding hills and mountains. All of these things help concentrate the energy of ghosts. But it does sometimes also have a bearing on the people that were left behind. So one of the most common ghostly sightings or ghostly experiences is when somebody has lost somebody very close to them. So perhaps a woman's husband has died and he comes back. Not often, perhaps, but maybe just once, maybe just after he's died. And in many cases, they're happy because they never had a chance to say goodbye, or she wants to see him one more time. This is a very frequent type of ghostly encounter. And it's reassuring for some that, yes, he's come back to say goodbye. And the same sort of thing, perhaps, when somebody has died, but we don't know it.
Right.
And so you have a dream. You have this uncanny feeling in the night that there's something bad. You might even dream about a person that has died. And sure enough, you wake up in the morning and you get the phone call, your grandmother has died.
Right.
And it can be very uncanny, but that sort of thing does happen a great deal. And it may be that the person who was dying was thinking about you a lot. It may be that you were thinking about them because, well, you love them. But also there may be something that, well, I can't quite comprehend, some sort of telepathy that does connect people in ways that these days, with all sorts of electronic and digital gadgetry, we can hardly imagine. But people are connected in those ways. And I think there is a lot going on between people,
Yeah.
living people and dead people, that is something that is, I think it needs to be studied a lot more before we fully understand it.
At the precise moment my grandfather died back in 2007, I heard a very strange sound like a right above my ear. Not something I speak about much because it's very freaky, but I was absolutely, I had a little panic attack. I knocked over the lamp. I was like, what is this strange sound? And I found out the next morning that my grandfather had passed that night. And I thought, well, what are the odds of that? That must be a connection.
Yeah, in my mind, there's a very direct connection. Although it could have been something else. You might have
Sure.
heard somebody saying something outside that you could hear inside, but that sort of thing often does link to somebody who has died. And we didn't know it in your case. Or it might be somebody who has died and they're coming back to send us a message. Many people like that. They don't want it to happen too often. I met a woman recently who said that her husband came back and finally she said, Bill, stop it, you're scaring me. But yeah, sometimes it happens a little bit too often.
More recently, I had a cat. There was a cat that I was very good friends with in Iceland, and she died pretty suddenly. And swear I had 3 dreams in a row where this cat just came and cuddled. Actually, I came into a dream that had nothing to do with her, and I was just like, "Oh, there's Skutta." And then I'm just like cuddling with this cat in this dream, and I knew that she had died, so it could be also trauma or sadness processing, but
Sure.
it was still quite interesting to me that this happened over and over
Yes.
and over again.
Yes.
So here we are at Fantan Alley.
Johnny, as we're walking through Fantan Alley, I have to warn you that many people walking through here have experienced something very creepy. They see a shadowy figure moving this way,
Uh-huh.
a young man running frantically, just a shadowy figure, but often they feel themselves being pushed up against the walls or they stumble to the ground and there's nothing there to trip on.
Okay.
This is the story of Chan.
Chan, I remember that name.
We talked about Chan earlier. Indeed, Chan lived around the corner. And there was a young girl, a beautiful girl, that lived next door. Her name was Yogam. He proposed to her, but she could not marry him. And she told him so. And he came back the next day and gave her a small jar. There was a liquid in it. You see, a man by the name of Yip Tang had bought her. This is something that wasn't legal, but he had done that anyway. She was a slave girl.
Uh-huh.
And Chan gave her this little jar, and she looked at it and said, "Oh, you've bought me perfume." "No," he said, "I bought you poison. Pour it in your Yip Tang's food. Kill him, and then you can come with me." Well, this was crazy. This boy had no money. He could not buy her freedom. And now he was asking her to poison Yip Tang? Yeah, she'd be hanged if she was caught. This kid was trouble. "Go away, stupid boy. I never wanted to see you before. I don't want to see you now, and I'm not going to marry you. Got the message? Go away and don't come back." Well, all night he saw other young men passing by, talking to her the same night, same thing the next night. He went crazy. He just snapped with jealousy. And he had a friend who worked at the Chinese theater down here. They hatched a plot. And they crept up. The friend reached in, grabbed Yogam by the hair, and pulled her head out the window. And Chan had concealed a cleaver in his sleeve, and he brought it down across Yogum's neck and chopped her head off. And then he fled. He needed a place to hide or escape. He came to Fantan Alley. This was the gambling alley. He knew the way through. He'd been here many times. And as he started running into the alley where it's so narrow, suddenly a group of men coming from one of the gambling dens filled the alley. They were going to a restaurant. They blocked the way. He turned around. There were people now running after him. He couldn't go that way, and so he turned around and dove into the group of men, pushing them up against the walls. And in the jumble, they blocked the way of the people running behind him, and he managed to get out right down there and managed to escape. He ran a couple of blocks until he reached the American Hotel, and Tommy Burns saw him pass by. And a couple of days later, Chan was found in the coal cellar of the American Hotel, hungry and frightened and covered with Yogum's dried blood. And of course, people wonder about Yogum. She had been murdered on Yip Tang's premises. He was so terrified that she was going to come back and haunt him that he made sure that her funeral was the most elaborate that money would buy, with food, money, and clothing, and all the things the spirits need on her grave. She had no reason to come back and haunt anybody. But all the stories that we've told are true, and this particular one is in the coroner's inquests.
Is it
In the BC archives, I have not made up a single thing.
Okay.
From here, we're heading a couple of blocks away to the old cemetery.
The old
I
cemetery.
prefer to call it the old burying ground, but these days many people call it Pioneer Square.
Okay.
One of the older cemeteries in town, and there are lots of ghosts there.
Okay.
So if you're up for that, let's go over there.
What, from your perspective, is the afterlife like, as far as you can gather?
If you look at different ideas over many thousands of years about what different cultures have believed about death, it is all sorts of things. Everything from the really, really bad to the really, really pleasant, the Elysian fields and all those sorts of things. Think about Halloween. Halloween in the Celtic world was the time when it was believed to be the end of the year, and at that time, the dead would try to find their way back into our realm, the realm of the living. And there was even an idea that there was a curtain that separated the two realms, the land of the dead from the land of the living. And at the end of the Celtic New Year, the curtain lifted up, and the dead could move freely into our realm. And people didn't want this. They wanted those ghosts to be back where they were supposed to be, and that's why people put on scary masks. They made noises. They lit bonfires. They carved horrible faces and pumpkins and turnips, just to give the ghosts the message that they had to go back to the other side, so that hopefully by midnight on October 31st, when that curtain descended once more, the ghosts were back where they were supposed to be. But, you know, in the minds of many people, in a place like Victoria, which is really in the realm of extremely haunted, maybe if that curtain exists in some places, maybe it doesn't really exist here. Maybe the ghosts are moving freely back and forth all the time.
Is the afterlife something we should approach with trepidation and apprehension, or is this something to be looked forward to? How do you feel about it?
Personally, I think that it's not something to worry about. Some people will, of course. They fear death. But I think as people get older, they don't fear death nearly as much. But in some cultures, death is something to be feared because even if you had done some minor indiscretion during your lifetime, there are horrible trials and tribulations that we have to go through. I must admit, I don't think it's going to be quite like that. At least I hope it's not.
Yeah.
If it is, I'll come back and let you know.
Victoria is considered to be a very ghost-heavy city. I mean, certainly you're able to make a business talking about ghosts here, and there's lots of stories about ghosts. Why Victoria? Why is this a place with such a thriving ghostly population?
Why is this? I think in Victoria, for various reasons, the bedrock under the city, the surrounding salt water, the surrounding hills and mountains hold the energy a great deal. And it's also quite possible that in Victoria, people are just more in tune to this. And I've talked to people who have done ghost tours in other cities who say that they've been criticized for doing that. In Victoria, no. We receive very little criticism. People are fascinated. And as soon as they find out that we tell ghost stories, they want to tell us their stories. They really are interested. If you tune it out and say, no, it can't be, then you shut out the idea that ghosts are around. Ghosts haunt places, and they can move from place to place, but ghosts can also haunt objects, and usually something that had special emotional attachment for them. And we bring those things into our homes or our businesses and suddenly wonder why the place is haunted. you bring in a psychic and they say, well, it's that object. Where did you get it? Well, I just got it last week, and that's when the haunting started. I think because Victoria has had over the years a lot of antique shops, maybe the ghosts have come with these antiques from other places. But I think probably it's really the people who are here, who have lived and died, that really form the basis of the very haunted history of Victoria.
Have you experienced very many ghostly things with your guests on the actual tours? What are the chances that something happens for us just now?
From a public relations point of view, we don't say we guarantee ghosts. It's not like going whale watching where you'll get a free ride if you don't see whales.
They're not performing monkeys.
Yeah, about 20% of people have experienced a ghost once, or quite often many times. And if people have experienced things already, the chances are they will see them again and experience them again. But it's like having good eyesight. People that have good eyesight or good hearing perhaps have a heightened sense than people. Well, for example, I have glasses, and so I can't see very well without my glasses. And so it is. Some people have the ability to sense ghosts in the same way, perhaps, that cats and dogs can sense things that we can't as humans. And so some people have a heightened ability to sense these things.
Okay.
And on our tours, if they have that heightened ability, then they may very well experience something that other people on the tour might not.
Now, quick question. Why are we here? What's the story here?
We are in a cemetery. Although looking around, you probably wouldn't notice that it's a cemetery. There are a few tombstones, but you can walk through, and I'm sure there are many people who've come from the nearby offices at lunchtime who have a sandwich on a bench that don't even know there are 1,300 people buried under the sods of this place. The bodies were not moved to the new cemetery when one was established in the 1870s. This place has all the bodies. And we have a number of stories about some of them. There's one I would really like to relate the most. It's a story that actually relates to a place we've been earlier on our Pedicab ride, Bastion Square.
Okay.
And it's a woman by the name of Adelaide Griffin.
Adelaide Griffin.
That's right. And she and her husband operated a saloon. It was called the Boomerang. They had come from Australia, so the Boomerang was a good name for it.
Makes
Gold
sense.
Rush days, 1858. And the saloon just happened to be directly across the street from the old jail, the jail for the colony of Vancouver Island, where the hangings took place. And people would come to the Boomerang Saloon for a better look. They would climb up to the roof. They could see over the fence. They would get a front row seat to look into the yard of the hangings. But unfortunately, Adelaide died during a typhoid epidemic in the year 1861. And Ben, her husband, was grieving, of course. He had her buried here in the old burying ground. She had a tombstone. We know that. Her name is in the burial records, but in the early 1900s, most of the tombstones were cleared away. But we know that Adelaide is here. People, in fact, began to see her very soon after she was buried. Now, many people knew Adelaide. She was a fixture in the bar. She and Ben ran the place together. Adelaide often behind the bar herself. She had long, flowing hair. She had high cheekbones and sunken eyes. And she had a flowing gown that she always wore. And she held her hands in a rather unusual way. She often held her hands like this, over her shoulders. And after Adelaide had died, people began to see her here. They knew who it was. There were no streetlights here in those days. This was out in the country, 1861. And, well, people thought it was just somebody fooling around to scare people, maybe somebody wearing a dress with a lantern inside.
Right.
But this was so realistic. If it was somebody fooling around, wouldn't they be walking on the ground and moving around the tombstones and the trees that they encountered? But in this case, the ghost was floating above the ground and passing right through every obstacle she encountered. And so many people stayed away from here, especially at night. But then people began to see her down in front of the Boomerang Saloon. Gaslights came a year or two later. And if you're leaving a saloon late at night and you've had a bit too much to drink, you might see a ghost or two. But people didn't want to admit this. People might make fun of them. And so if they did see the ghost of Adelaide, they would keep it to themselves. But it all kind of came to a head one night near Christmas, 1861, so a few months after Adelaide had died. And three men in the dark were leaving the saloon, And she stood right there. They didn't believe in ghosts. They were terrified. But suddenly she disappeared. They hurried on. She appeared a second time, right in front of them, blocking the way. And at this point, they weren't sure what to do. They were grown men. They didn't want to believe in this stuff. But when she disappeared for a second time, they hurried on. But when she appeared again, they turned around and went back into the saloon. They needed a drink because there was no doubt they had seen the ghost of Adelaide. And they began blabbing, and everybody began to hear their stories, and that maybe broke the ice, and others who had seen her began to tell their stories as well. Well, Ben Griffin, Adelaide's husband, who was sitting behind the bar listening to all of this, realized because he had seen her, yes, he had seen his wife's ghost, but he thought it was just like a dream or maybe wishful thinking. And he decided he wanted to see her, but under more controlled circumstances. And so he joined a group of spiritualists. Spiritualism was really popular back in the 1800s. The idea that you could make contact with the spirits of the dead and talk to them, ask them questions. And, well, it was led by the man who was the mayor of Victoria at one time. And there were many seances held throughout the city, but sometimes above the Boomerang Saloon after hours. And whether Adelaide appeared to their circles, we'll never know. But what we do know is her ghost is still seen right here in this little cemetery and in front of where the Boomerang Saloon used to be. And there's no photograph of Adelaide. We can't tell you exactly what she looks like, but they call her the Lady in White. We believe that she was buried just over there because that's where her ghost has been seen so often.
As engaging as I find your stories, a great many of the people who are watching this are naturally not going to be people who believe in ghosts. Why should we believe that they exist?
When people don't believe in ghosts or don't believe the stories, and that's fine. Some of them do sound rather far-fetched, but truth is stranger than fiction sometimes.
It's true, yeah.
Often it is. But the stories that we tell really are the ones that we actually have been able to identify as authentic. And usually that means that it's happened more than once, and it's happened to people that don't know each other over a fairly long period of time. To be honest, the majority of people on our tours do believe in ghosts.
One would
because
think.
if they really don't believe in them, they probably won't come on the tours to begin with. But we've had people say at the beginning of a tour, a disgruntled husband who's been dragged along by his wife, his arms are crossed, and he'll say, I don't believe in this stuff. Well, that's okay. Just listen to the stories. It's rather nice when those people at the end of the tour come up to us and say, I really didn't believe in this stuff at the beginning, and I'm not sure I believe in it now, but these are fabulous stories. Thank you.
Right?
Yeah, it's good.
So as we draw this tour to a close, I do have one last burning question I wanted to ask you, John. So very important question, but here goes. What is your mustache wax? Because I really like, I like your twirls.
Well, I've tried many, but it's actually a product called Got to Be.
Got to Be.
Yeah, and it's used for spiked hair and things like that, but somebody suggested I try it for my mustache, and it's worked perfectly.
Yeah, looks really, really good.
Yeah.
Sir, thank you so much for your time.